Welcome to the session on processing requests and responses in servlets. In this session, you will learn to use the HTTP request methods, identify the architecture of web container, identify the request and response process, handle errors in servlet processing. In the previous session, you learned about the creation of an HTML form that is provided to the user as an interface. As shown on the screen, the user enters data in the HTML form, and then clicks on the Submit button. When the Submit button is clicked, the web browser creates an HTTP request using the URL in the action attribute of the form tag, and collects all the data in the form fields. The web browser then packages the data into the HTTP request. This HTTP request transfers the data to the server. The HTTP request utilizes the key equal to the value pairs that are separated from each other by using the ampersand symbol. The syntax is shown on the screen. The displayed example shows season, year, and title as keys, winter, 2004, and Westminster as values, and ampersand, which will be passed in URL, to transmit the form data to the server. A browser transfers data by using either HTTP GET method request or HTTP POST method request. In the displayed example, the highlighted line shows the HTTP GET request header. In this line, the keys and values are visible from the form fields. In the displayed example, this line shows the HTTP POST request header. In this line, the keys and values are not visible. Instead, they are written at the end, preceded by a blank line. The HTTP GET method request is used in the situations when the amount of form data is small. It means the data to be sent has countable bytes. Such data is of text type only. The user wants to allow the request to be bookmarked along with the data. For example, the data needs to be allowed to be visible in the requested URL, or the request needs to be processed multiple times without any side effect on the server. For example, the same page is submitted to the server multiple times, and every time the changes done on the page remain intact. The HTTP POST method request is used in the situations when the processing of the request changes the state of the server, such as storing data in a database. The amount of form data is large. Such data can be large images or MIME type, or the content of the data should not be visible in the URL and should be transferred securely. Java servlets are components that must exist in a web container. The HTTP requests are processed by the web container. The web container is built on top of Java Platform, Standard Edition, and implements the Servlet API, and all of the services required to process the HTTP and other Transmission Control Protocol, Internet Protocol or TCP/IP requests. As shown on the screen, the web container on the web server receives the request and activates the servlet that matches the requested URL by calling the service method on an instance of the servlet class. To process the HTTP requests and to generate the HTTP response, the web container performs 4 steps. The first step is the web browser connects to the web container. As shown in the figure, the browser initiates an HTTP request by opening a TCP socket with our web server. The input stream of the socket contains the HTTP request data. The output stream of the socket contains the HTTP response data. In the second step, the web container creates an object that encapsulates the data in the request and response streams. As shown in the figure, the web container will create a request object by passing the HTTP request stream data on the input stream of the socket, and a response object that will generate the HTTP response stream on the output stream of the socket. In the third step, the web container executes the servlet by executing the service method on the selected servlet, and the request and response objects are passed as arguments to the service method. Finally, the servlet uses the output stream to generate the response. In this step, the response object provides the servlet with the printWriter object that allows the servlet to generate the body of the response by using the print or println method. The HttpServlet class is an abstract class and is extended to create a servlet that responds to an HTTP request. The displayed figure shows HttpServlet API. As shown in the figure, HttpServlet is an abstract class that is inherited from the servlet interface. The HttpServlet service method looks at the HTTP method in the request stream and dispatches to the doGet or doPost instance method based on the HTTP method. The HTTP request information is encapsulated by the HttpServlet request interface that provides various request GET header specific methods. The HTTP response information is encapsulated by the HttpServlet response interface that provides various response set header specific methods. When a servlet is unable to complete the processing of a request due to some problem, the programmer has two choices to handle the situation. The programmer can create an HTML response that describes the problem to the user in terms that are appropriate to the user, or the programmer can create a servlet that throws an exception. In general, you should not allow exceptions to reach the user. Therefore, the first case is commonly preferable, rather than throwing an exception, as the user has no interest in the exception, and the exceptions often include detailed technical information that can be a security breach for the website. On the other hand, if the second case is decided to be used, wrapping of the exception is required, either in servlet exception or unavailable exception. In this session, you learned that a browser transfers data using either the HTTP GET method request or the HTTP POST method request. The web container is built on Java SE platform and implements the Servlet API that provides services to process the HTTP requests. The HttpServlet class is an abstract class that is used to create a servlet. The exceptions should be wrapped in either the Servlet exception class or the unavailable exception class. Happy learning.